Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the utility integrations in Home Assistant, and specifically, mostly we'll be working with history stats. And what it does is give you some ability to do some statistics, to do some plotting of values and stuff like that. Although I'm not going to get into super detail about that, there's a super excellent write-up that I'll show you here in a few minutes. So let's get started. So what got me started on this was an article I ran across written by this person named Carlos. I'm going to say Gomez. He holds a lot of smartness, you can see here, located in Brazil, but he's talking about a smarter home assistant and getting started with some of the analytical tools. Now, I am not a psychologist, a math modeler, a programmer, or anything like that, but I do understand some of what he's talking about in this article. But what I want to talk about is, how we can take some of the stats, specifically history stats, and kind of build some visualizations with those. Now, he's using this mini graph card, and I'm not going to go into that today. What I'm going to do is show you how I did this, and then using Grafana, some of the values I get from it. Specifically, what I'm looking for is an issue I found, and I'll show you here with my Grafana. Today I was watching some of my power usage, and if you watch some of my other videos, I've talked about the little power metering plugs like the S31 and the cloud-free plug that have power monitoring. And so I set up some power monitoring with that. If you look at my fridge plug over the last couple days, you'll notice that it went from let me just blow it up a little bit. It went from running on a cyclical basis, and then it started running continuously. And so I got the idea that I would like to see a way to know how long that stuff has been running over a period of time, so I can understand if it's an anomaly or something else is going on. So one of the ways I'm going to do that is I'm going to show you how I've done that here with these history stats. To do this, I'm going to show you some code snippets. And I know that those of you who don't play with YAML, this is going to be new and scary and whatnot. It's really not as hard as it seems like it would be from the get-go. It's just making sure that you're formatting your YAML correctly and that you are putting things in the right places. I'm going to pull up my Visual Studio Code, and I'm using Visual Studio Code with a Samba integration on Home Assistant so that I can talk directly to my configuration directory on my Home Assistant server or Home Assistant device. And there's three files I'm going to be most interested in: the configuration.yaml file, the sensors YAML file, and the templates YAML file. So we're going to start with the history stats integration. It's a useful statistic integration for discrete variables over user specified time range. So this can calculate the amount of hours an entity has spent in a given state. And that's primarily what I'm going to do today, is show you how I can do that. Calculate the percentage of time that an entity has spent on a given state. So that's a ratio. And how many times the entity has changed to a given state. So again, we're going to focus on the amount of hours that something has spent in a given state. And this integration requires two of the following time period intervals: a start, so when the period starts, or the end, when the period ends. And then the duration indicates how long the time period lasts. If start is specified, then it's how long forward. So if we say start from, let's say, 000, that'll be midnight forward, the duration. And if we say 24 hours, it'll basically be a full day. If it's end, it's going to be midnight tonight or whenever, backwards towards the duration of 24 hours, which would be midnight earlier in the day. So the end or the beginning or start. And by the way, this is built in as an integration to Home Assistant. I didn't do anything to add this. It just is already there. So there's nothing to install when you're doing this, if you're using a standard install of Home Assistant. So we're going to create a couple of files. Now I already have this. In your configuration file, you want to put in an entry that looks like this: sensor, and then include sensors.yaml. And what that tells it to do is you're going to have a separate sensors.yaml file, and all the sensor data or sensor configuration is going to go into that file. Now, I'm not going to use the examples he uses here, using sunny, cloudy, rainy stuff. What I'm going to show you is how I did the history stats in my configuration. So in order to do that, let's go back over to Visual Studio Code, and let's start with the sensors file. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at how long my fridge has been running. So I have a template here for fridge running. I'm going to look at how long my freezer's been running, and I have a template for that. And then I've got some stuff in addition to that, such as how much time somebody spent watching YouTube or Netflix. And then, of course, the washer run time. And then the fridge on time is actually the history stats platform. And then the freezer on time is the history stats platform. So let's start with this up here. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to set a value template such that if the current energy usage is greater than 0, it's going to consider that as true. And this is all templating. Now we can talk a lot about templating, and that's a whole separate video or discussion. And there's a whole section on templating in Home Assistant that you can reference to look and see how you set these templates up. In my case, I went there and used it as a reference. So basically the syntax is this. It's a platform template, and this is in your sensors.yaml file. It is a sensor, and the name of it is going to be fridge running. So that's going to be the actual name of the sensor. The friendly name is also something you can specify as fridge running, so I know that's the name of this sensor. The value template then is going to be looking at the state of the sensor fridge plug energy current, and it's going to convert it to a float, so it's going to make it a number. And if it's greater than 0, then the value becomes true. If it's less than 0 or 0, and not greater than 0, in other words, it's going to be a state of false, which means that if it's true, it's running because there's current being drawn through that plug that I'm sensing it with. And if it's 0, then there's no current being drawn. The assumption is it's off. And if we look at our developer tools over here, we can see the state of the plug itself. So looking at fridge plug energy current, we're running at 0.95 amps. So almost right at an amp of power. And the same thing is true for the freezer plug, if that's actually running right now. So the freezer plug energy is 0. So that means it's currently false or off. And we're doing this because we need to be able to look at these values here and determine whether or not it's on or off, and then apply those to the history stats. So what we do next then is we skip over the rest of this, and we're going to go down here to fridge on time and freezer on time. And what we're looking for now is whether or not this is set to is true or not, and then it's going to start adding that to the historical value. So this is another simple block of code in YAML. So the platform is history stats. Now that's the utility helper that's built into Home Assistant, and the platform is already there for you to use. I'm going to name it fridge on time. The entity ID is sensor.fridge running, and that's of course what we made up here. If you look over here, fridge running, that's the name of the sensor. So it's looking at that fridge running sensor. If the state is true, then it's going to consider that running for the purposes of the historical stats, and it's going to note the database that we have this value as set to true. The same thing happens for the freezer on time. All of the same stuff. We have history stats, freezer on time, sensor freezer running is the name, and it's of course we saw that up above. State is true. If the state is true, then we will in this period of time. And what this period of time means is, since I'm using this as a start time, that means, as you remember in the article, anything from now going forward, or from the start time going forward, is going to be counted as part of this whole algorithm here. So I'm looking at the past 24 hours, or I'm looking at 24 hours starting at 0, 0, 0. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. That's midnight. That's the start of the day. So from that start last night at midnight, 24 hours in the future, I'm checking to see how much time this device has run. Now you can also do it start time in and get it from tonight at midnight backwards to 24 hours prior to that. So we have those 4 entries. Essentially, you have the freezer on time, the fridge on time, the freezer on time, and then you have the 2 templates that actually set the values to true or false. We have all 4 of those entries. And once you have these entries set up, of course, you always go over here and we go to our server controls. We check our configuration. And if our configuration returns valid, then we restart Home Assistant because it won't read those values in those files unless you restart Home Assistant. Once you have those values, or once you have restarted Home Assistant, then you can go over to Developer Tools and you can make sure that that stuff is actually there. So I'm looking for anything that says running. So let me search for running. And I have sensor freezer running and sensor fridge running. Now, since I talked to you a minute ago, it looks like the freezer has turned on. So now that state is true. The sensor fridge running is true. Of course, I'm also monitoring the washing machine and that state is off. So what do we do with this now? I mean, it seems like a lot of work for such a simple thing, but what I want to show you is how I'm actually using this. And the way I do this now, and you saw this just a minute ago, is I'm putting this in Grafana. Now, in his example, of course, he uses the card, this card here, but he's also doing something where he's layering on the different values over time. So you have a whole bunch more statistical stuff in here. And again, that's something, if you're interested in me doing more of this kind of stuff, comment that in the video below and I'll work on it some more. But this here, in this case, he's doing a lot more than what I'm going to do with it today. What I'm most interested in is looking at the runtime for my particular appliances. What I've done is created a visualization that contains 3 single stat cards, and it shows me the runtime of my fridge over the past 24 hours. So, or since midnight tonight, really, or midnight today. Because you remember we did 000 with a run or duration of 24 hours. And then it shows me my freezer runtime and how much the washer, it's spelled wrong, but washer has run. And it also shows here, you can adjust the single stat to do this or not, but it shows me when it actually ran throughout the day. And it's hard to see on the video, but I do see that. And that's up to you how you want to set that single stat visualization up to do that. But I'm most interested in just that number right now. So let me show you how I build this visualization. First thing we're going to do is add a new panel. We're going to add an empty panel. And we're going to give it a title of Appliance Runtime Demo. And then we're going to choose stat for the type of visualization. Of course, no data because we need to select a query down here or build a query. So we're going to choose entity ID first. And that's going to be on time. So we have, let's just start with freezer on time. And until you select a measurement here, nothing's going to show up. So I'm going to select a measurement and it'll be hours. And now you can see that I have a one stat or a single stat showing here. And you can see the runtime over the course of this last 24 hours, and it'll log it here. So 4 hours and 30 minutes of runtime. But I want to add a second one. So that second one is going to be the fridge runtime. So we'll do a query here. Again, the same exact process, entity ID, on time, and we'll do fridge on time this time. And again, select the measurement, hours. Now, one thing you want to make sure you do is put down here what this is. So this is freezer, and this is fridge. So it gives it a meaningful title. And so now you see a freezer and you have fridge. We can do a whole bunch of stuff over here. And if you want to get into detail on some of the Grafana stuff, look at my Grafana videos, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I am going to set a couple of thresholds here. So I'm going to set this to greater than 3 hours. Let's make it 4 hours. We'll color this yellow. And greater than 6 hours, we'll make it red. And let me adjust this down a little bit. Let's make this greater than 5 hours runtime. Really, I'm still setting a baseline on how long these things actually run, so I don't really know what the actual time would be where it starts to get into warning zone. So you can see here that I apply this, and now I have a couple of single stats or stats that show me the runtime of these devices over the last 24 hours. And that's how you build the Grafana part of it. Again, if you want more detail, make sure that you look at my Grafana videos, and you can get into this a lot more, do a lot more with it, as you can see here. Now, in future videos, if you're really interested in this, what we can do is we can compare the runtime for these appliances today versus the runtime yesterday, and get mean values and get a whole bunch of other stuff that's statistics-based items. Again, I encourage you to read that article, because there's a lot I'm not covering here. This is just really the high points, and kind of also showing you a limited set of possibilities that you can do with this in a very quick manner. But I'm also interested in how much time or how much watch time has occurred on my Roku devices. And the way I do that, it's very similar. It's using the history stuff as well. But one of the things I've done with this, and it's a little more involved here, is looking at templates. I'm triggering this update to show me the updates, or to log those updates every minute. So if we look at this setup for templates.yaml, you'll have a trigger. And again, the templates in Home Assistant, the actual templates documentation shows you how to do this. So you can go through that documentation and take a look at that. But the platform is a time pattern. And in the documentation, it talks about using minutes and hours. But in this case, we can do minutes. And then we do a /1 like this. It tells us that we're going to be doing this every minute. If you change this to hours and do a /1, it would be every hour. So what I'm doing here is I've created a sensor named Living Room Roku Active App. And the state is going to be an attribute. Now, if we look at the Living Room Roku under our developer tools, this is the media player, Living Room Roku, and it's currently in an idle state. The state is not what we want, because the state doesn't give us the actual app that's running on the Roku. What you do is you get the attributes here, and you can see all of these attributes that are installed, or all these different apps that are installed on my Roku. You can see that the app name currently active is called Roku, and that's just their home screen. So it just sits there idle all the time in the home screen. And this is really what I'm most interested in. So I'm not going to get a state, I'm going to get a state attribute. And to do that, I use this bit of code to get the state attribute. And again, in the templating documentation, you can read about this, but state attribute is this. And you're going to have the name of the device, so Media Player Living Room Roku Ultra, and then the actual attribute. So it's called app name here. If I wanted the source or the friendly name or the source list or device class, I could get all that through this same app or same attribute, but I want the app name. And then I want it to update every minute, as it shows here. Now this timestamp, what it's going to do is it's going to provide a timestamp in the database of the time that this was updated, and it'll do it once a minute. Now the caveat to that is storage, and writing to your SD card or whatever else you're writing to, is you're going to be writing to that database every minute. There's going to be space considerations, not much with this, it's not very much space at all, but there'll be space considerations. There'll be, writing and reading and drive wear out kind of considerations and stuff like that. So if you don't need to do this, you don't do this. You don't have to do this. The reason I did that is that this may be running for, someone may be watching a 1 or 2 hour binge on YouTube or on Netflix or something else, and I want my watch time to update more often than that. So I'm going to have this thing update every minute, tell me how much time it's been in that state. So that's why I use this over here. And this is a templates.yaml file. It's created the same way as we did the sensors.yaml file. You go into configuration.yaml and you put in the template : templates.yaml entry, and then you build this file and reference this file right here. And that's how you get it to read these entries. Now that I have this in here and I've restarted Home Assistant If I look back at my sensors file, I want to do something with the data that's coming across from that sensor. And let's just to make sure we have the name. So the name of this is Living Room Roku Active App. That's the sensor name that I gave it when I created it. So I'm looking for that active app sensor. So coming back up here, I've created two different history stats entities here. One is called YouTube watch time, and one is called Netflix watch time. So what happens is the platform is history stats. We talked about that's the integration. That's what's doing the work. I've given a name of YouTube watch time. That'll be the name of the sensor. It's based off of this active app sensor that we created in the template. So whatever the value is here is what it's going to look at. And then the state, if it's YouTube, it's going to mark the amount of time that YouTube app has been running and put it in the database. Again, starting at midnight last night or tonight, earlier today, whatever, 000, and then run for 24 hours. So it's going to count the amount of time that it's run for the last day. And if you don't do start, as I said earlier, you won't get the values for today. So if you want to start from midnight going forward, that's fine. If you want to start from midnight going backwards, that's fine. So the end, and I probably misspoke earlier. If you set this to end 000, it's going to look at 24 hours before midnight. So then you would actually see yesterday's stuff. So you can do it that way as well. And I could actually name this YouTube watch time yesterday, 24, make this end, and then I would have a comparison between the two. And of course, the same thing for the Netflix. Everything's the same, except I look for the state Netflix rather than the state of YouTube. And of course, if we now go look at this, I've had this running a little bit. If we go back over to my Grafana dashboard, we will see that I have the watch time for both of those set right here. And for today, we've had 1.3 hours of Netflix watch time and 1.2 hours of YouTube watch time. And so this is how you can take the data using history stats as a built-in integration to Home Assistant and get some meaningful data from it. Now, again, this is super high level. This is just touching the surface, kind of giving you a little bit of an idea of the possibilities that you can do with this kind of stuff. And then if you're interested in this, make sure you comment down below. Tell me you want to see more of this. I will build more of these kinds of videos and go more into detail about statistics and things like that. If you have any questions, put those down below. Also, if you would like to join as a member of the channel, there's a couple of perks you get with that. So please make sure you click that join button down below. Like the video if you like it, thumbs up there. And then if you're not a subscriber, I'd appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button as well. And we'll see you on the next video.